The image was as jarring as it was brief, a blur of floral fabric and flailing limbs crashing against the scarlet tunic and bearskin hat of a household cavalry guard. For the tourists on Whitehall that crisp October morning, it lasted mere seconds before the woman was swiftly, decisively subdued. But that fleeting collision was not an ending, but a detonator. It ignited a chain of events that would pull back the curtain on one of Britain's most iconic institutions, challenge public perceptions of silent duty, and intertwine two lives in a way no one could have predicted. This is not the story of the attack everyone saw. This is the story of everything that happened next, the ripples that turned into waves, and how a moment of shocking violence led to an even more shocking redemption. The roar of London's morning traffic was a distant hum, filtered through the solemn quiet that always seemed to surround horse guards. The air was cold and carried the damp, stone smell of the old city. Jonathan Ainsley stood immobile at his post, a statue carved from wool, leather, and unwavering discipline. His hands, encased in white gloves, rested on the leather strap of his sword. His eyes, fixed on a point in the middle distance, saw everything and acknowledged nothing. The bearskin on his head weighed a familiar 13 pounds. The jack boots were polished to a liquid black. He was Trooper Ainsley of the Blues, and Royals, a living piece of the pageantry. To the shuffling crowds, pointing phones, he was part of the scenery, less human than the stone archway behind him. His mind, however, was miles away. It was in a small, overly warm room in a rehabilitation center in Wiltshire, where his younger brother, Liam, was learning to walk again. The improvised explosive device in Hellman had taken both of Liam's legs and a piece of Jonathan's soul. The letters Jonathan wrote every night, full of forced cheer and regimental gossip, felt like lies. The silence of his vigil here was filled with the phantom sounds of a different desert, a different war. The crowd parted slightly. He registered the movement in his peripheral vision. A woman in a faded floral dress, her hair a frizzy blonde halo. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, her face etched with a tension that seemed out of place among the smiling tourists. She'd been lingering at the barrier for nearly 20 minutes, which was unusual. Most people took their picture and moved on. Jonathan maintained his 1,000-yard stare, his training automatic. Do not react. Do not engage. You are the fortitude. The uniform is the symbol. Then it happened. There was no shout, no warning curse. Just a sudden, stumbling rush. The woman, her face a mask of desperate fury, barreled past the low black barrier. She swung a worn handbag, connecting with a dull thud against Jonathan's arm. She began to pummel his chest with closed fists, her blows weak and frantic against the thick wool of his tunic. "Look at me," she screamed, her voice raw and breaking. "Just look at me, you useless man. You're all useless." The scene erupted in gasps and shouts. Phones were raised higher. From the shadow of the arch, the police minder and Jonathan's own supervising corporal of horse moved with the speed of snakes. In less than 10 seconds, they had her. She was pulled away, her screams dissolving into ragged sobs, her body going limp between the two large men. As she was led towards a waiting security office, her head turned, and, for one fractured second, her eyes met Jonathan's. The fury was gone, replaced by a bottomless, drowning despair. It was a look he recognized. He had seen it in Liam's eyes in the hospital before the morphine took hold. And Jonathan had not moved a muscle. Not a flinch, not a step back, not a twitch in his expression. He had remained, as per his orders, an immovable object. The crowd buzzed with a mix of alarm and admiration. "Incredible discipline," someone said. "Stone cold," remarked another. The incident was over. The spectacle concluded. The tourists, having captured their slice of unexpected drama, began to drift towards Downing Street. Back in the barracks that evening, he was commended for his stoicism. "Textbook, Ainsley," his corporal said, clapping him on the shoulder. The old bird was clearly unhinged. "Good show." But the praise felt like ash in his mouth. That woman's eyes haunted him. They weren't the eyes of someone unhinged. They were the eyes of someone broken. And his duty, his sacred duty, had been to be a thing, not a person. He had stood there while a human being shattered against him, and he had offered no more comfort than the stone pillar beside him. The guilt, mingling with his existing grief for Liam, formed a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He had faced Taliban fire, but he felt more of a coward in that moment than ever before. The woman's name was Eleanor Finch. She was 67 years old and lived in a small, scrupulously clean council flat in Catford, South London. The flat smelled of lavender polish and stale loneliness. The walls were covered in framed photographs of a smiling young man in a mechanic's overalls, her son, Michael. The floral dress she'd worn was the one she'd bought for his wedding, a wedding that never happened. Michael had been killed by a hit-and-run driver 3 years prior. The driver was never found. The investigation, in Eleanor's mind, had been lazy, perfunctory, another file closed by useless men in uniform. Her grief had not faded. It had metastasized. It turned inwards, festering into a severe depression that her GP treated with pills that made her feel numb. It also turned outwards into a simmering, generalized rage against systems, against authority, against the faceless machinery of a world that could take her boy and just carry on. The final straw was a letter that morning, a cold, bureaucratic notice about a reduction in her housing benefit due to a change in circumstances. It was a mistake, a cruel, automated error, but it was the weight that broke the dam. The uniformed guards at Horse Guards, symbols of an immovable, uncaring state, became the target for a tsunami of pain she could no longer contain. In the stark, fluorescent-lit security office, Eleanor sobbed, the fight utterly drained from her. She was processed, photographed, and charged with assault. The police officer, a weary woman with kind eyes, asked if she wanted a solicitor. Eleanor just shook her head. "I just want to go home," she whispered. But she wouldn't go home, not yet. The video, of course, had gone viral. Madwoman attacks guardsman. Royal Guard shows incredible restraint. The narrative was set, the crazy old bat and the stoic hero. Yet, in a quiet corner of the internet, a different conversation started. A journalist named Samira Khan, who wrote about mental health and social care, saw the footage. She didn't see a madwoman. She saw a profoundly distressed human being. With some digging, she discovered Eleanor's name, her tragic history, the benefit cut. She wrote a powerful piece, not excusing the assault, but contextualizing it. The headline asked, "When a society fails its vulnerable, is it a surprise when they lash out at its symbols?" The article sparked a media firestorm of a different color. Now, the story was a debate about austerity, mental health support, and invisible grief. Jonathan, avoiding the newspapers, nonetheless felt the shift in the barracks. The straightforward hero narrative was getting complicated. He felt a strange protectiveness towards the woman whose name he now knew. He asked his corporal, tentatively, about the legal proceedings. "She'll get a fine, maybe community service. Don't waste your sympathy, Ainsley. She assaulted you." But he couldn't help it. He requested, and was denied, permission to attend her court hearing. It was deemed inappropriate. So, on the day of the hearing, he took a day's leave. He changed into civilian clothes, jeans, and a plain jacket, and sat at the back of the public gallery in the magistrate's court. He saw Eleanor, smaller and frilier than she'd seemed on the street, plead guilty. Her voice was so quiet the judge had to ask her to repeat herself. Her solicitor mentioned the mitigating circumstances, the trauma, the depression, the trigger of the erroneous letter. The magistrates, after a short deliberation, gave her a 12-month conditional discharge, ordering her to seek continued support from her mental health services. It was, in the circumstances, an act of mercy. Eleanor, looking stunned, shuffled out of the dock. Jonathan waited, his heart pounding. As she passed his row, he stood up. She didn't recognize him out of uniform. He fell in a step beside her in the corridor. Mrs. Finch, he said, his voice gentle. She looked up, wary. Yes. My name is Jonathan. I was the guard. The one you, he gestured vaguely, unable to say the words. Her eyes widened in horror, then filled with fresh tears. She took a step back, as if he were radioactive. Oh God. Oh no. I'm so sorry. I'm so terribly sorry. No, he said quickly. Please don't. That's not why I'm here. I wanted to know if you were all right. She stared at him, utterly bewildered. The man she had attacked was standing in a grimy courthouse corridor, asking after her welfare. The world, already tilted off its axis, seemed to spin in a new, incomprehensible direction. She didn't answer. She just turned and hurried away, leaving Jonathan standing alone, wondering if he'd made a catastrophic error. Jonathan's visit to the court was not discreet. A court reporter recognized him, and the next day's papers had a new angle. Guards courtroom compassion for attacker. The story deepened. Now, it wasn't just about an attack or a systemic failure. It was about a startling, personal act of empathy. The regiment's response was frosty. While publicly they praised his Christian charity, privately, he was reprimanded. You are not a social worker, Ainsley. You are a soldier. Your involvement ends here. You have brought undue attention to the regiment. The sense of isolation within his own unit grew. But Jonathan was changed. The knot of guilt had loosened, replaced by a sense of purpose. He couldn't explain it, even to himself, but Eleanor Finch's brokenness was tied to his brother's and to his own. He started making inquiries, using his own time. He contacted the charity that had helped Liam, asking about resources for elderly people with trauma. He even rang Samira Khan, the journalist, who was both shocked and intrigued to hear from him. You're a rare one, Trooper Ainsley, she said. She gave him no concrete information about Eleanor, citing privacy, but her respect for him was clear. Meanwhile, Eleanor was back in her silent flat, but the silence was different now. The shame of the attack had been colossal, but the encounter with Jonathan had scrambled her understanding of it. He hadn't been angry. He had been concerned. The useless man had been kind. It unsettled the rigid narrative of her grief, where all authority was the enemy. Her community psychiatric nurse, a patient man named Derek, noticed a shift. You seem thoughtful, Eleanor. The soldier, she said haltingly. He came to court to see if I was okay. Derek, wisely, did not judge. And how did that make you feel? Confused, she admitted. And in that confusion, a tiny crack appeared, a sliver of light in the prison of her pain. A week later, Jonathan took another risk. He wrote a letter, not a formal letter, but a simple, handwritten note on plain paper. Dear Mrs. Finch, I hope you do not mind me writing. I was the soldier you met at the court. I want to say again, there is no need for any apology to me. I could see you were in great distress that day. I have seen that look before in my brother, who was badly injured serving in the army. I understand that pain can make us do things we would not normally do. I am not writing for the army or for any other reason. I am writing just as one person who has seen hurt to another. I hope very much that you're getting the support you need. If it is not too much trouble, and only if you wish to, perhaps you could let me know you are all right. Yours sincerely, Jonathan Ainsley. He included no return address, only his name. He posted it to her flat, hoping it would reach her. When Eleanor found the letter in her postbox, her hands trembled. She took it inside, laid it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for an hour before opening it. She read it once, then again, and then a third time. Then she cried. But this time, they were not the harsh, angry sobs of before, nor the numb tears of depression. They were tears of a profound, disarming relief. Someone had seen her, not the madwoman, not the benefit claimant, but her pain, and that someone was the last person she would ever have expected. It took her 3 days to compose a reply. She wrote and tore up a dozen drafts. Dear Trooper Ainsley, she didn't know if that was right. Thank you for your letter. It was a kind thing to do. I am ashamed of what I did. My son, Michael, died 3 years ago. The world became a very dark place. I'm sorry I took it out on you. You were just doing your job. I'm seeing a nurse. It is slow. I'm sorry about your brother. Yours, Eleanor Finch. A fragile, extraordinary bridge had been built between a silent guard on Whitehall and a grieving mother in Catford, constructed from two simple letters and a shared understanding of loss. The letters continued, once a fortnight at first, then weekly. They were never long, never intrusive. Jonathan wrote of his brother's small victories in rehab. The first time he managed to transfer from his wheelchair to a car independently. He wrote about the oddities of ceremonial duty, the tourists who try to make him laugh, the weight of the bearskin in the rain. He did not write of his loneliness in the barracks, the feeling of being adrift, but Eleanor somehow sensed it. Eleanor wrote of her slow re-engagement with life. She had joined a bereavement group, reluctantly at first. She wrote about Michael as a boy, his love for cars, his terrible singing voice. The act of writing these memories to a sympathetic stranger was a therapy in itself. She told him about the bureaucratic error with her benefits being finally corrected and the immense pathetic relief it brought. Jonathan found himself looking forward to her letters more than anything. They were a tether to a reality outside the rigid structures of military life. He began to read about grief counseling, about complex PTSD, not out of duty, but out of a genuine desire to understand. He even mentioned some of what he'd learned to his brother Liam during a visit, and for the first time, they had a conversation that wasn't about physio or prosthetics, but about the different shapes of emotional recovery. The story of their unusual connection could not stay secret forever. A neighbor of Eleanor's, noticing the regular, neatly handwritten letters with a Windsor postmark, mentioned it to a friend who happened to be a freelance journalist. A small piece appeared in a local London paper, From Attack to Pen Pals, the unlikely friendship of the guard and the granny. It was picked up by the national press. This time, the narrative was one of hope and humanity. The regiment, sensing a public relations opportunity that finally cast them in a warm, modern light, changed its tune entirely. Jonathan's commanding officer called him in. This reflects very well on the household cavalry. Ainsley shows the human heart beneath the uniform. Well done. Jonathan felt sickened by the hypocrisy, but held his tongue. He worried more about Eleanor. He wrote to her immediately, warning her that reporters might knock on her door. Don't talk to them if you don't want to, he urged. This is private. Eleanor, however, found a strength she didn't know she had. When a reporter did come, she answered the door. She was polite, but firm. What happened was wrong. I was wrong to do it. But Trooper Ainsley is a good man. His kindness helped me when I was lost. That's all I have to say. Her quiet dignity in the face of the camera was more powerful than any shouted statement. The story took on a life of its own. They were invited onto a daytime television show to discuss healing and forgiveness. Both refused. A book offer came. They refused. They had no interest in being spectacles. Their friendship, conducted through ink and paper, was real and fragile, and they instinctively protected it from the glare. Then, Jonathan received news that Liam was being awarded a medal for his service and was to attend a ceremony at a recovery center. It was a big step for his brother. Jonathan was granted leave to attend. He wrote to Eleanor about it, sharing his nervous pride. Her reply contained a simple sentence that struck him to his core. You have been his guard, just as you were mine that day. A different kind of duty, but just as important. He realized she was right. His purpose wasn't just to stand still. It was to stand firm for people. For Liam. For Eleanor. Perhaps even for himself. The immovable object had learned to be a foundation. The correspondence lasted for over a year. The public fascination eventually faded, moved on by the next scandal, the next heartwarming story. This suited them both perfectly. In the quiet space that returned, their friendship deepened. They graduated to occasional, carefully arranged phone calls. Jonathan's voice, so often trained to bark orders or remain silent, was soft on the phone. Eleanor's, once frail with grief, grew steadier. A significant milestone arrived. Liam was moving into an adapted flat, his first independent home since his injury. Jonathan was taking a week's leave to help him settle in. He mentioned this to Eleanor in a letter. Her response was to post a small, carefully wrapped parcel. Inside was a handmade, crocheted blanket in the colors of Jonathan's regiment, blue and red. The note said, "For Liam's new home. To keep him warm. A small thing for me." Jonathan was overwhelmed. He brought the blanket to Liam. When he explained who it was from, Liam, a tough, no-nonsense man who had endured countless horrors, was silent for a long moment. "The woman from the telly? The one who whacked you?" he finally said, a slow smile spreading. "Blimey, John, you do make some strange friends. It's really nice. Tell her thanks." Jonathan did better than that. He asked Eleanor, very tentatively, if she might like to meet. Not in London with its memories, but maybe somewhere neutral. He suggested a cafe near the recovery center after he and Liam were settled. "Liam would like to thank you in person for the blanket," he wrote. "And I would very much like to finally meet you properly." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs when she read the letter. She was terrified. What if in person it was awkward? What if the delicate understanding they'd built on paper collapsed under the weight of reality? But Derek, her nurse, encouraged her. "You've come so far, Eleanor. This is the next step, and you can always leave if it's too much." So on a bright spring afternoon, Eleanor took a train out of London. She wore a simple, new dress, not the floral one. Jonathan waited outside a small, quiet cafe in a country market town. He was in civilian clothes again, looking anxious. When he saw her coming down the street, he recognized her immediately, but she was different. The desperate tension was gone from her face, replaced by a gentle, wary calm. "Eleanor," he said, stepping forward. "Jonathan," she replied, a small smile touching her lips. There was no handshake, no formal greeting. After a brief, hesitant moment, Eleanor simply reached out and patted his arm, the same arm she had struck over a year before. It was a gesture of apology, of acknowledgement, of connection. "Shall we go in?" Jonathan asked. "Liam's inside. He's a bit nervous." "So am I," she admitted. They went into the cafe. Liam was at a table by the window, his wheelchair positioned to the side. He looked up, and Eleanor saw the same strength in his face that she saw in Jonathan's, mixed with a visible, hard-won peace. She also saw the blanket, folded neatly over the back of his chair. "Mrs. Finch," Liam said, his voice gravelly but warm. "Thank for the blanket. And, well, thank for looking after my brother, too, in your own way." Eleanor's eyes filled, but she smiled. "Please call me Eleanor. And thank you for your service, Liam." They had tea. The conversation was stilted at first, then eased. They talked about the town, about Liam's new flat, about Eleanor's garden, which she'd started tending again. They did not dwell on the past. They were not the attacker and the guard, nor just pen pals. They were three people, all bearing different scars, who had found an unexpected harbor in each other. Jonathan watched as Eleanor and Liam chatted about cars. Michael had loved them. Liam had worked on them in the army. A connection formed independently of him. When it was time for Eleanor to catch her train, Jonathan walked her to the station. They stood on the platform in a comfortable silence. "It was good to meet you, Jonathan," Eleanor said. "Properly. You too, Eleanor. Will you keep writing?" she asked, a trace of the old worry in her eyes. "If you'd like me to," he said. "I would. And maybe we could do this again sometime. You and Liam could come to London. I could make a proper lunch." "We'd like that," Jonathan said. And he meant it. The train pulled in. She boarded, and as it pulled away, she waved from the window. He waved back. Jonathan walked back to the cafe, where Liam was waiting. "She's lovely," Liam said simply. "You did a good thing, John. A really good thing." Jonathan nodded. He thought of the immovable guard on Whitehall, the symbol of silent strength. He was still that man, but he was also more. He was a brother, a friend, a lifeline. The attack that shocked everyone had not been an end, but a violent, messy beginning. It had chipped away at the stone facade, revealing the vulnerable, compassionate human beneath. And in doing so, it had healed not one, but two broken souls forging a friendship that proved that sometimes the most powerful duty is not to stand your ground, but to reach across it. This response is AI generated and, for reference purposes only,